People who actually got married and then, if we're both single and we're 35, will get married, deal. What's your story? Probably too late for this not to get married, but I have a story about this. We met in college and were instant best friends. I was 20. She was 18. We spent all of our time together and were briefly lovers, but we never formally dated because both of us were very much into being wild and free and enjoying our youth. We dated other people on and off, but we talked about it and agreed that a committed relationship between the two of us would be an all or nothing kind of thing. Since neither of us wanted to give up our hedonistic, promiscuous, irresponsible lifestyle, we made a point of not committing to a relationship. A few years went by that way and we were very happy, right up until our sisters passed away. It was a car accident. They were 16 and 18, and both were gone in the crash. My friend was utterly, completely devastated. It still hurts me to remember it, even now. Her father, though, was even more devastated, to the point where he was legitimately willing to let himself starve rather than try to go on living. She moved home, out of state, to take care of him. She cut ties with everyone for a while, even me. I didn't see her again for 2 years. She was so different after that. Before the accident, she'd always been the most joyful, exuberant, positive person I'd ever met. After she came back, she was quieter, sadder, maybe wiser. I wanted to be there for her more than I'd ever wanted anything in the world. Not being able to fix things for her, not being able to make it better, that hurt more than anything I could ever remember. I guess that's when I realized how in love with her I was. I told her that I loved her, that I wanted to be there with her. And she told me that she couldn't handle the idea of any kind of emotional connection for a while. Maybe a few years, she said. Maybe never. Maybe she'd never be able to open up emotionally again. She said she needed space from me, particularly for me. She said she needed to figure out what it meant to be alive in a world where her sisters were gone. She asked me to give her time, and I told her that I'd give her anything she wanted. She told me that she'd never been happier than she was when we were together. I told her the same. I told her that I understood, and that's when we made our pact. I was 25 then, and she was 23. We agreed if she turned 30 and I turned 32, and if she had learned to heal and if she hadn't fallen in love with someone else, and if I hadn't fallen in love with someone else, then we'd get married. So that's how we parted ways. She moved to Wyoming to be alone. I moved to Germany to get as far away from her as I could. We didn't keep in touch at first, but over the next few years, we built up a correspondence. We wrote letters because we both liked writing letters. We emailed now and then. Sometimes we'd mail each other books that we thought the other would like. Years went on, and we became closer and closer. When I turned 30, I half-jokingly brought up our marriage pact. I told her that I haven't ever fallen for anyone else. I didn't mention this, but I couldn't have fallen for anyone else. I always compared every other woman to her, and in my memory, she was perfect. She replied that she was still very serious about our agreement, that she'd never fallen in love with anyone else either. I asked her if she thought she'd begun to heal, and she said she had, as much as a person could ever heal from something like that. A year later, she told me she'd like us to meet and spend some time together to see if the spark was still there. It was. She was living in California at the time and had found a job there. I'd always wanted to live in California anyway. I proposed to her 6 months later, and she smiled and told me, how fair, that I had to wait another few months when she'd be turning 30. I thought it was silly, but at that point, things were going so well that a few months didn't seem like it could matter at all. But I'm crying now, so I'll have to wrap this up quickly. She passed away. That's how the story ends. She was hit by an intoxicated driver and spent 2 days in the ICU before she gave out. I went to her funeral. I spoke to her father, but I barely remember what we said. I've never spoken to him since. I don't have the willpower to make myself find out how I was doing. It'll be 4 years ago this November. I'm in therapy and trying to learn how to have feelings again. Other than blank, mindless, miserable rage, I often wonder if this is what it felt like for her. She made progress. She learned to feel again. That thought is what keeps me going. She did it. She'd want me to do it. That's it. That's the story. It's a crappy story, and I hate it. It's hard to explain what it's like to only have two emotional states, anger and nothing. Someone said this reminded them of a Nicholas Sparks story, and here's the difference between life and a love story. In the book, she'd have regained consciousness before she passed away. In the movie, she'd have opened her eyes and looked at me one last time. I wouldn't have had to see her all messed up. I'd have had a chance to tell her how much I loved her instead of the last words I said to her being, Don't forget to pick up Scout's flea medicine. I'd be noble and tragic now, instead of a miserable shell of a person just trying and failing to believe that anything could ever be worth anything ever again. I'm sorry. I'm so angry. I want to delete this post, but my therapist would tell me that this is progress. Somehow. Wow. That's a real tearjerker. I'm not crying, you're crying. Story 2. Weird couple my wife knew had such a pact and followed through. Girl was a really introverted, quiet, homely type. Sweetest girl. But she never had a boyfriend as far as I knew. And we saw her off and on for 6 or 7 years. Then suddenly out of nowhere she invited us to her wedding. Anyways, it was to a guy we had met a couple of times who was one of her friends who seemed very much like her. My wife teased her that more must have been going on all that time. But she was straight up about it and said no, they just decided it was time. Conversation was something like, yeah, you know how people have pacts to get married if neither of them are till they hit X age? Well, we just decided it really wasn't going to happen for either of us, and to cut that short. Basically, we were just like, cool, and then left it at that. Anyway, she married him. They looked happy. The speeches were a bit odd. They didn't really talk about love, but a lot about how they were marrying their best friend. They're still together. It's got to be at least 5 years. They have a little kid. Last we saw them, they looked happy, and that's all that matters, really. Friends with tax benefits. Story 3. I made this pact with my best friend Kyle. We were about 21, 22. At that point, we'd already been friends for a good 8 years. He's always been my favorite person. The one guy I knew that I never had to be fake around. I could trust him with my life. I loved him. We loved each other, but only as friends. Everyone tried their hardest to push us together, but we maintained that we were forever friends. Boyfriends or girlfriends were all completely jealous of the bond we had. We refused to let that stop our friendship. More significant others just had to deal with it or move on. Let me add that no one was more persistent than his auntie Kathy. She used to beg me to date him, but I'd always tell her no, and I'd always be his friend and be there for him. Fast forward to us being 26. He's moved across the country and engaged to someone else. We still talked all the time and made sure we stayed in touch. About a year later, Kyle came back home for a visit. This visit changed my entire life. I hadn't seen him since before he left. We visited his aunt, made dinner, and just shared stories. During the small get-together, I realized that I was completely in love with my best friend. But why and what was I supposed to do? He was engaged to someone else. I had to just deal and be his friend. About 8 months later, his wonderful, adorable aunt passed away. It was very tragic and sad. Kyle came home, and I spent every single waking hour with him and his family for the next few weeks. Over the next year was a bumpy ride for Kyle. He missed his aunt, broke up with his fiancée, and moved back home. We became closer and closer in the middle of all this sadness. By the end of that year, we started dating. The year after, we got engaged. And the year after that, married. I can honestly say that I married my best friend. And sometimes I feel very strange about it because if his aunt hadn't passed away, he would be married to someone else right now. And we'd be living very different lives. All her life, all she wanted was for us to be together, and she's the only reason we are. Love you, Aunt Kathy. Story 4. My girlfriend and I are planning for an engagement after we reunite in the same city after everything settles. We met when we were 5 in Korea. I left for Canada when I was 8. I was born in the early 90s when social media was non-existent. I came back to Korea on a vacation when I was 13 and reconnected with her as a friend, but in a few times we met up, our chemistry was so strong. When I returned back to Canada, I told my friends lightly I found my future wife. I came back when I was 17 for a funeral and also saw her there with her family during the service. Despite only being in Korea for 2 days, seeing her rekindled my attraction to her. The social media became more apparent, so did our communication. I came back to Korea again in 2017 to tell her that after all these years I still liked her. She told me she liked me as well despite our distance, but unfortunately, she rejected me at the time as she had just gone through a breakup and needed time alone, but I asked her that when I turned 30, I'd like to marry her. Fast forward to now. We're 30. We started dating last year and I've never been happier. I visited Korea before the outbreak and it was the best couple weeks of my life. Our conversations are endless. We really understand each other. And I think I found my life partner, even though I don't really believe in all that. I don't believe in fate, but this feels pretty damn close. A childhood friend who's now my girlfriend, soon-to-be wife. I feel like this is a fairy tale. After everything settles, we'll move to the same country and seal the deal. This is all a long story short, of course. Story 5. My partner and I were close friends for 12 years before we got married. Through many friendships and relationships with other people, including one of us following a former lover across the country and the other being briefly engaged, we stayed just friends for a very long time. On New Year's Eve in 2007 or 8, at the ripe old age of 23, we stupidly made a pact to get married to each other if we weren't married by 30. Long story short, we didn't start dating until we both turned 30. But we got married pretty quickly after we started dating. Just celebrated 5 years of marriage. We have a 2-year-old. It's unconventional, but so are we. And it's ours. Story 6. Obligatory, not me, but a friend. Disclaimer. She married a college friend 3 years ago at the age of 33. Their bet was to get married if they were both single at 33, and the intention was to basically prank their parents by going through with it. They intended to be married for several months and then just casually mention it and later just get it annulled. So they went to the courthouse with a pair of friends, got married, and then she moved into his apartment. Thing was, they'd been friends with for years when they were both single. And living together was so nice that they just stayed together. They're expecting their first kid in a few months. Story 7. Our promise wasn't for when we were 35, but 30. We've been friends for years before we made the joke promise and have been friends for 11 years. Became friends when I was 17 and she was 16. Through many friendships and relationships with other people, including one of us almost getting engaged to a former lover, we still remain friends. When I clocked 20, if I recall correctly, we jokingly promised to get married to each other if we weren't married by 30. Long story short, I'm 28 now and she's 26. We didn't start dating until last year and are supposed to be getting married in June. If lockdown lets us. We went through a lot of maturity and personal changes in our early 20s, and it was so admirable watching how she grew and became wove. Over the course of 5 years watching her grow, I knew she was and still is the one. No regrets here. Story 8. Not married to her, but I'll tell my story anyway. One of my best friends growing up was a girl. She was my neighbor and 2 years ahead of me in school. We used to spend the summers swimming, riding bikes, eating ice cream, and laying in the grass at the park, watching clouds. Typical American upbringing in the 80s to 90s. As we got older, we drifted apart as we were in different grades, and hanging out with the neighbor kid who was 2 grades behind you wasn't cool. In high school, though, we kind of started talking again. We'd hang out on my dock in the late evening, talking about life. During one of said talks, we made such a pact that if neither was married by our 30s, which seemed ages off at the time, we'd marry each other and have kids. We lost touch after she left for college and went off to a different state as well 2 years after. I eventually married, found a job, had kids, and whatnot. One night I was finished reading to my son and was sitting in his room waiting for him to drift off when I got a Facebook message. It was her. We chatted a bit and I accepted the friend request and was perusing through her profile. She was smoking hot. The next day or so, she sent me a message that she was bummed to find I was married and had kids, etc., because of our pact. She sent a long message saying I'd grown up to be quite attractive and successful and that my kids were beautiful and my wife was lucky. I couldn't help but feel anything but sorrow for her. Her life looked like she lived at bars on Facebook and had different boyfriends every few months. She had a service industry job, and something about it just seemed like it didn't fit as she was getting older. I had in fact been missing having a life and missed friendships and bars and adventures in my younger life. But I suddenly realized how living the life of a 25-year-old wasn't so great in your mind in your 30s, and I gained a little appreciation for the suburban family life I was in. Time is a weird thing. I'm still friends with her on Facebook. And I like her photos of her drinking in neon glow, and she likes photos of my youngest in the bath. That's kind of a bittersweet story of how people wonder how things could have been. Story 9. My parents had this kind of pact. Here's their story. Both of them were focusing mostly in their careers and didn't have time for marriage before then. They'd been dating on and off for 7 years, and my mother was afraid of getting too old to marry. So she left her island home and a great job in newspaper marketing for the mainland, and they got married. Things went south pretty quickly. Both of them were working up to 20 hours a day and they didn't see each other much. I suppose the loneliness got to my father, because he slipped into depression, accused my mother of having an affair, and tried to end himself. Things got worse when my mother miscarried what would have been my older brother or sister. I only know what little I could gather from hearing them fight after I was born, and I know there's much more to the story than what I know. It came a few years later after they had been trying for a child for years. And lo and behold, I have a birth defect and I almost passed away. But I lived. A few surgeries later, I'm relatively healthy and my dad quits his job to look after me. When I grew up enough to not need constant supervision anymore, however, my dad wouldn't get another job. My parents fought over it for years and it kind of destroyed what was left of their marriage. The only reason they don't fight anymore is because my mother just gave up. Things only got worse as I grew. The house where I grew up now looks like a home out of hoarders because my mother doesn't have time to clean. She's the only breadwinner for the family, and my father is too depressed. He's stubborn and has a bad temper, so he acts like it's our problem whenever we're brought up and refuses to go to therapy. He hardly ever leaves the house and doesn't really have any friends. He's only gotten worse since my grandmother passed away. I can't say anything more because I'm too ashamed of the rest. It's quite sad to see two otherwise good people be so horrible to each other and live in such a sad state. Story 10. I upfront told my husband when we started dating, I will want to get married and have kids at some point if this works out. I'm being honest. If you don't want that, let me know now. He said, I'm ready to see where this goes. And if we haven't terminated each other in 3 years, let's do it. All the way through dating in our first 3 years, he kept saying, let me know if I ever do anything that annoyed you. Don't keep it to yourself, okay? So I kept waiting to find something. It never came. We never argued, never got bored, and always looked forward to what the future held for us. Our third year came around and we had already had a little chat about if we wanted to get married. We had just moved into a new place, so I proposed, with an omelet. About 3 months later, I was pregnant. We were trying, and 6 months later, we married. We just celebrated our first year anniversary with our 10-month-old daughter. Everything is amazing. We've never felt so complete. Still not argued, still excited about our future, and still haven't found anything that annoys me about him. Story 11. I'm pretty sure a couple that lived above me in a former apartment had a similar arrangement. It was in an older house converted to 2 apartments, and I could hear almost everything they yelled, through the thin ceiling or floors. They had dated years ago, broke up, one of them moved 5 hours away. Years later, as they both approached 30, they got back in contact and quickly moved in together. Got engaged, married, and had a kid about a year later. I could not believe what this guy came up with and went through all of it. The way she emasculated him over every little thing. She was crazy. My girlfriend and I would sometimes listen while making dinner and our jaws would drop. A few times I heard her throw things at him that broke. It was not good, and even called the police dispatch once. Not to have them come by, but for his safety in case she tried anything with him, and there needed to be a record in his defense. Eventually, this spilled over to me at one point, and with him right there, I told her she was crazy and unreasonable to her face, that I was not her husband and would not put up with her cruelty or yelling. When she asked me what that meant, I told her I could hear every crazy thing she goes off about, and nobody should have to deal with the insults and emasculation she throws at her husband. The satisfied smile on his face next to the look of shock on hers is something I'll never forget. At that point, I told her to have a nice life and slammed the door in her face. She was shocked that anybody would talk back to her like that. I moved out a few months later. While they still argued, she definitely was put on her back foot after that incident. Not sure if they're still together, but would not be surprised either way. Story 12. My ex-husband and I met because his wife and my husband were cheating on us with each other. We had some mutual friends and ended up at the same place at the same time crying. Started talking, he said his wife left him for another man, and I said my husband left me for another woman. After we talked a while, amazingly, we realized that our spouses had left us for each other. The ex-spouses had no idea that we had met or knew each other, so we cooked up a plot to make them jealous in the hopes of getting them back, but the scheme started with him taking me to a concert that he had bought tickets for him and his ex. Then we both made it known that we were dating, even though we really weren't. We just wanted to make them jealous so they would come back to us. She had ended up leaving him with 3 kids that he didn't really know how to take care of properly. Didn't know how to keep house, etc., so I started going over just to help out. I felt really bad for him and for the kids. Somehow I ended up living there, and next thing I know, things were starting to get serious between us. They ended up divorcing us both, and we were kind of like, hey, this situation works for both of us. Let's just get married. So we did. I was under the impression that we were in love. At least I loved him, and I thought he loved me. Once the youngest child was about 16, and many, many years later, he confessed to me that he had never really loved me and that our marriage had been a marriage of convenience. We were together 7 years total, living together and married. He was much older than me, too. I was 19 when we met, and he was 33. I wasted so many years of my life on something that just wasn't even real. I feel like I gave him the best years of my life raising his kids, only to be told he never loved me. That was a kick in the gut, but I'm okay now. The divorce was 15 years ago. I'm now married to a wonderful man. Sorry if this story doesn't fit here. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 13. My husband and I did this. We met at around age 10. I lived in a violent household and he lived in the trailer park near my house. I ran away one night, and he was sitting on the porch shuffling Yu-Gi-Oh cards silently. We both froze when we saw each other. He then asked if I wanted to play because he had an extra deck. We became quick friends. Whenever the violence got to be too much, I'd run to his house and we'd play. As we got older, we tried dating, but we were fairly innocent and messed it all up. Went back to being friends. We swore to one another that we'd get married if we were single by age 30. I joined the military after high school and he decided to go to college. We stayed connected through social media. I got married and had a daughter. He found a girlfriend and had a son. We talked about our kids and how happy we were for each other, and even laughed about our silly agreement. One day, a few years later, after my then husband and I split amicably, he texted me out of the blue. We hadn't talked in months due to being adults now and things got in the way. The text made me very nervous. It sounded more like a goodbye. His girlfriend had left him, and so much else was going on in his life that he just wanted to thank me for being his friend. I immediately called him. We talked for a long time, once again bringing up that we would never face the future alone because if we didn't find our soulmates, we were going to get married at 30, grow old and sit on our porch while we made tons of cookies. By the end of it, he was laughing and agreeing, and it felt like he was out of that dark hole. I moved back to my hometown a few years later. I was 29 and he was 30. I kind of forgot about the plan at this point due to some family members being very sick. We bumped into each other one day with our kids, and he also had a guy friend in tow. It was like we were teens again. We chatted a bit. He apparently hadn't dated much after his first girlfriend left him. The friend spoke up and said I should totally double date with him, me being the date for my best friend. He casually mentioned we didn't need to date. He was 30, I was almost 30, and it had dawned on him that his soulmate was standing right in front of him. He refused to let me run away again and wanted to fulfill the contract. I swear, my face couldn't have been redder, nor could my heart have thumped any faster. It was the sweetest thing anyone had ever said to me. I didn't expect it from him. And honestly, I don't know why I never realized how much I really loved him also. From the moment we played Yu-Gi-Oh on his porch that fateful night. Fast forward to now, and we're happily married with a beautiful 16-month-old son. We still talk about our journey to each other. We still play Yu-Gi-Oh occasionally. I've taught our kids to play too. Life is good. Story 14. Fell in love with a girl, M, about 6 years ago. We realized that because we'd be moving to different states from where we met, both military, that it wasn't going to work. Stayed in touch, made a pact, and eventually realized that feelings were real. Along the way, she'd gotten married and eventually decided that it wasn't worth staying with a guy. He was a huge schmuck, and I was engaged to someone, M2, I thought would have been the one to marry. That also didn't work out for me. Em realized that the idea of getting married to someone else angered her off and proceeded to tell me immediately after she found out that M2 and I were no longer engaged. Shortly thereafter, we decided distance and Pact be damned. We're going to try to make it work. 2-ish months later, Em and I are happily together, visiting each other every chance we get. Absolutely convinced she's the love of my life, and apparently, she's convinced I'm the love of hers. Our original plan was to get married at 35 if we were both single around that time. The new plan is, screw the original plan. We're going to make it work. Marriage will happen whenever it does, but in the meantime, let's just take it step by step until our jobs allow and we're both financially or physically able to be together. Every other day, we make comments about how we should just screw the plan and get married now because at least then we have a chance of rushing our jobs to push us closer together. She's my best friend, my person, the one I tell all my secrets to, the one I drink on video chat with while watching Netflix with, the one I don't feel right without. We've spent maybe a week together since we decided to screw it, let's date. That week was the best time of my life, and I'm doing everything I can to get more days like them again. Story 15. My boyfriend and I at one point decided if we never got girlfriends, we'd move in together and maybe get married. Though I was not straight at the time. We were best friends. We spent tons of time together and many people assumed we were dating. He liked me and I loved him more than anyone in the world. Except in a friend kind of way. We started talking about this potential future quite often. At one point, he mentioned that it definitely wouldn't happen if I got a girlfriend, and that's when I decided I didn't need a girlfriend. Eventually, we started fake dating because people kept asking if we were, and it seemed like it'd be easier to explain when we finally did move in together. Within about a week, I knew I was in love, and probably had been for quite a while. I loved him so much, and he's still my best friend. And I'm super excited for when he gets out of college and we can finally move in together and hopefully, eventually get married. Story 16. I have one of these with a friend. Never set a specific age. We were 16 at the time, so a specific age wasn't important to us at all. Not long after this, I got a boyfriend. Somehow she and I got even closer. We held hands through the halls, understood each other so much, better than we fit in with others, sent cute texts, secret messages, and told each other often that we loved each other. She was my best friend. Things got bad with a boyfriend. We broke up, and then a mutual friend she and I had been introduced to by a boyfriend told everyone he knew biased details of the breakup. Hurt me a lot for too many reasons to list in the comments. The worst part, though, was watching her get closer and closer to the friend while we quickly fell farther apart. The cute wifey and the sposes stopped, and the hand-holding stopped. Even hugs stopped, and I didn't know why. I still don't know why. I trusted her. I don't know what happened. It's only been 3 years since we first made the pact. We were both so serious about it, and at the time we made it, I was so happy with her. She's supposed to be home from Alaska soon, where she was going to school. Whenever I try to talk to her about it, she says everything's fine. We still have the same small friend group, but I don't know how to talk to her anymore. Anyway, doesn't answer the question, but it's relevant and still something I'm struggling to understand. I understand if the pact is gone. I understand if we're no longer wifey and esposa, but the years of friendship, if I could at least have that back, maybe I'd feel some ease. Story 17. I had a great friend in college. We have since drifted apart and moved to different states. I always said back then, even to him, that if we weren't married by the time we were 40, I'd marry him. He was always wonderful, and I loved him as a friend. I just wasn't really physically attracted to him, and I couldn't figure out why. There was nothing wrong with him. I just didn't feel that way about him. And he never asked me out either. Everyone would say we should date, but I just couldn't think of him that way. I would spend a lot of time with him, and we'd talk for hours. I just genuinely enjoyed his company, so that's why I made the pact. Well, I'm married now anyway, but I was recently talking with a friend about him, so we looked him up just to see how he was doing. He's out of the closet and living happily. I wonder sometimes if I knew subconsciously or something, but it still shocked me and my friend. We've had other friends who've revealed they're not straight, and we kind of knew and weren't surprised, but we never expected him. Story 18. Not exactly the 35 scenario, but here goes. I met a lady when I was 15 and she was 38. She was my boss, my first job. We got on great. So many good times. I was an awkward and not confident teen, and I had a friend, a really good friend. In hindsight, I'm realizing as a type the best friend I ever had. She used to joke and say, "Man, if you were 20 years older, I'd marry you in a heartbeat." I'd laugh and say if she was 20 years younger, I'd marry her. We made that joke 100 times, it seems. When I was 18, I joined the Navy. When my time was up, I got out and went to the Army. And a few weeks down the time in between, I asked her if she'd like to be an NSA military spouse. Since she'd still not managed to find a guy at 46, I was still pure at 23 and an unrealized but soon-to-be-realized non-straight man. I was at least sure enough to make the proposal as NSA for best friends. She thought it was an amazing idea. Travel the world on my military adventures. We got married when I was stationed in Fort Sill. Somehow she accelerated from NSA to more by the time we got married. But her, not me. Not gonna lie, I had no idea how to do anything with a woman. It went sour. We stuck it out for I don't know how long. I'm gonna say a few months. She left and moved in with some family in CO. That was 1993, and I've seen her one time since, in 1995. No idea where she is or what she's doing. Never even got a divorce. I always felt like it ruined her life. My friend quickly tracked her down. She has a very common name with so many variations. On Facebook a few years ago, I was stunned to see a picture of her over 70 years old. She'll be 74 this year. I'm now 49 and life has slipped by so fast. I'd love to reconnect, but man, I don't want her to nag me and blame me for things going bad. Story 19. My grandfather once hinted that he and my grandma had such an agreement, but I don't think he ever explicitly acknowledged it, despite hours of me grilling them about family history. Just one comment, once, about how she didn't marry before she was 35, should have been unmarriageable, and that she refused to consider dating anyone but him. She had been born in 1910, he in 1911, they married in 1945. My father was born in 1943, was her second pregnancy, as the first one was stillborn. I have no idea if that was a full-term pregnancy, in which case she was pregnant when they married, or much shorter, as it was one of 4 that they had. I only mention it because it's the only thing that speaks against there being one of these arrangements. They'd known each other for some years, I don't know how many, but I have photos of both of them with my grandpa's then-girlfriend that he dated for 4 years. And my grandpa used to talk about how my grandma always did things she wasn't supposed to do with her heart condition, like skiing. Despite having many photos dating from 1943 when my dad was born, there are none of her doing things with her own friends, anything related to skiing, etc. Their relationship was companionable and friendly, highly cooperative, with few arguments, but also lacking in outward affection. They liked each other, had great camaraderie, did everything together, especially since Grandma didn't drive, and remained married until she passed away around 1978 or so. Story 20. I have two. Kinda. Sounds weird, I know. It'll make sense. A friend of mine and I, about 10 years ago, made the pact. Said if we were both still single in 3 years, we would date and see how it goes. 3 years go by. We say, okay, let's give this a chance. And for the most part, it was awful. She had a lot of quirks I didn't expect or know about and just essentially drove me up a wall. We stayed really good friends, though, and still are to this day. She doesn't know about the quirks. I told her I just wasn't ready or feeling it. Broke her heart and felt terrible about it, but this is forever we're talking about here. Fast forward to last fall. Yep, I'm still single. Girl one is off and married and happy now, so no, it isn't about her. Anyways, this chick I used to have a huge crush on in high school texted me out of the blue. We have always been friends, but just not non-stop talking friends. We talked probably once or twice a year, I'd say. She needed a favor and I was happy to oblige. Curious if my feelings for her would come back after 22 years. We had a long talk. We both had just been put through the ringer. 2019 was tough for both of us. She cried, I cried. It was an emotional night, to say the least. She gave me a big hug before she left, and it flooded me. All the feelings, all the emotion, years of missing this person. We have both been through so much at this point. To circle back to one another was serendipitous. I told her I wasn't going to let her go without telling her how I felt. She said she felt the same way. We've been dating 6 months now, and this person is my soulmate. We love each other so much. She's so good to me, and I can't get enough of her. We're 36 now, and 14-year-old me would be so excited to see and hear where life had finally got me to. It's kind of soon to be thinking about marriage, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to marry this girl. Story 21. Finally, a thread I can contribute to. So this happened when I was 28, about 3 years ago. I met a girl at work. Let's call her Jess. Her real name is quite unique as she's French, and I don't want to be too obvious. So anyway, she had just started working at the same place as me, and over the course of the next few weeks, I slowly started making conversations with her. It started with just a casual good morning as she would come into work. She was always later than I was, by about 10 minutes or so, and always seemed a bit flustered when she came into work. I can't really describe it, but the way she acted, mixed with her perfect French accent, was really endearing to me. She wasn't the most perfect woman by any stretch of the imagination, but there was just something about her I really liked. Anyway, a few days later I left for work early and bought a coffee for Jess when she arrived at work. She thought it was a bit odd at first, but it was enough so that I was able to start conversations with her. I asked her out on a date. She accepted, and it went really well. Over the few weeks, we had been on 3 dates or so. She had stayed at mine on one occasion. We got talking, and she said something along the lines of, "Did you ever think you'd be further along in life by this age?" Admittedly, I was a little offended by this, but it turns out she was talking more about herself than me. She admitted she was sad that she'd never really been in a long-term relationship and expected life to have played out a little differently. We kept chatting, and I jokingly said, "Yeah, I was hoping to be married by the time I was 30. She laughed and said that if I wasn't married by the time I was 30, then she'd marry me. "I promise," she said. I guess it was kind of cute. After a few weeks of occasionally meeting up and chatting, Jess told me that she'd been moving departments in my work. I didn't really think much of it at first, but not being able to see her every morning started to take its toll. Eventually, for some reason, the relationship sort of fizzled out, and that was the end of things with Jess. Fast forward a couple of years, I had a new girlfriend, a better paying job, and everything was pretty good. It was the day before my 30th birthday, and my new girlfriend, Sophie, was planning a surprise for me. I fell asleep, wondering what surprises tomorrow had in store. At 12 a.m., the exact moment that I turned 30, I heard a smash. Jess was standing in my kitchen. She had sailed down the side of my apartment building, kicked through the window, and was standing holding a baguette and a string of garlic. I remember the promise I made. She said smoothly in her alluring but now somewhat scary French accent. Anyway, one thing led to another, and she ended up hurting my new girlfriend with a slightly stale baguette. Me and Jess are married now. She makes really great omelets, too. Story 22. I'm late, but I think I have a good one. When I was in school, we had an English teacher who did this and told us the story. She had been asked out by this guy a few times, and she had said no. They were friends, but she said she wasn't interested at all. He kept asking every 6 to 12 months until, eventually, she said that if she's still single when she's 30, she'll marry him. She didn't give us any details about how old she was when this started, but based on other stories she told us, I would imagine they met roughly when she was 23. Anyway, when she turns 30 and she's still single, she follows through with it. They've been married 12 years and have 2 children, and when we asked her about it, she said that she's still not sure if she loves him, but she's settled because she's not getting any younger. She said that she wasn't the best looker, she's got a difficult personality, and with 2 young kids, she doesn't want to upset the family balance. She said that she told her husband if she still feels the same way when the kids are older, they'll just divorce and go from there. She was a nice lady, but totally crazy, really. A definite oversharer and maybe slightly unhinged, but probably one of the best and funniest teachers I had. Story 23. My current relationship is kind of like this. I'd been acquaintances or friends with my current boyfriend, Kenny, for years in high school. My junior year of high school, I broke up with my ex and wasn't going to have a date for the annual homecoming dance. Kenny and I had grown closer after the breakup due to the heartbreak I was experiencing because I had never been dumped before. Although it was a long while off, I got dumped by my ex in July and the dance was in October. Kenny and I had made a pact, saying that we would go to the dance together if neither of us found other dates. I was reluctant, but decided to enter the pact thinking I'd be able to score someone better. Although it was probably an impossible task, judging by the fact that he was a popular football player who also happened to be in a band, and I was a marching band and choir nerd. We met in marching band my freshman year, and that's how we became sort of friends. Band camp rolls by. We get even closer and start dating, but I didn't think the relationship would last more than a few months due to the many girls Kenny had gone through, and I truly thought it was going to be another rebound. We go to homecoming together, have a great time, and the relationship surprisingly doesn't fizzle out. As of right now, it's been 2 years. I'm at college and he's in the Marines, and our relationship, despite the distance, couldn't be stronger. I'm very happy I gave him a chance because I can confidently say he's my best friend, and I wouldn't trade a relationship for the world. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.